The time is just gone 14 minutes past 9 as we continue with our broadcast this morning. And today at 2 p.m., all eyes will be in Netherlands at The Hague. And we are looking at the ICJ ruling on the genocide case against Israel by South Africa. And what we're doing from now right until 10 a.m. this morning on the show is we're doing a pre-analysis of the what we can actually expect. Now, it is clear, and a lot has been said, a lot of analysis has been done, a lot has been actually written about this ICJ verdict that is looming. And this is a pivotal development. The International Court of Justice is set to deliver this highly awaited verdict. And let us see what happens. In fact, there have been a number of scenarios that have been spoken about on whether the court will determine whether Israel is committing genocide. Will they deal with this core question of a genocide in the first place as well? Could the court throw out the case? What emergency measures have South Africa requested? Will they be granted? What happens if the ICJ orders no provisional measures? Could an ICJ ruling make a difference for the people of Gaza? And all of this will be playing out, and also more importantly, looking at the panel of judges that will be issuing their verdict as well. Now, we know that the ICJ is not only a legal body, but it is also a highly political body. And a lot has been talked about as to which judges will vote for who will vote in favor of the South African proposals, who will oppose it. There are swing votes. So, all of this playing out in the eyes of the world, the international community is focused this afternoon at The Hague, and one of them is my guest, Maha Abdallah, who is going to be joining us shortly. We also have got Dr. Nazreen Shaik. And Maha is a PhD candidate, Zionism, settler colonialism, and genocide. She is in Brussels right now. Dr. Advocate Nazreen Shaik is an international human rights lawyer. I see Dr. Nazreen Shaik has also joined us. Dr. Nazreen Shaik-Peremanov has joined us as well. So let's greet Dr. Nazreen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh and welcome.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah for having me.
And also to Maha Abdallah. Wonderful you're able to join us. Welcome to the broadcast this morning.
Thank you, and thank you for having us here today.
Yes, Maha, I believe you are in Brussels and you are actually hoping to make yourself, available at The Hague, or making your way to The Hague this afternoon. And I'm sure this case is of huge interest to you personally.
Absolutely. I think everybody is looking at The Hague today and waiting for this historic moment and decision to come from the court. We're hoping that the court will finally rule and respond to the urgency of the situation in the Gaza Strip in particular, and order Israel to stop its aggression, to stop its military operations against Palestinians, particularly in the Gaza Strip, and to lift the siege to allow for the urgent and unimpeded humanitarian aid and support and essentials for survival to be able to enter and given to the 2.3 million Palestinians who have been entrapped in the for more than not only 4 months now, but for 17 years, but for the past 4 months, sorry, under relentless bombardment and attack from all fronts, under total siege, in conditions of forcible displacement and transfer that are inhumane and indignifying.
Yes, Dr. Nazreen, you and I had a chat, in fact, just ahead of South Africa presenting its case to the ICJ. And since then, both the cases, South Africa, and we've seen Israel also presenting their case. Now, today is clearly a pivotal moment. It's a pivotal development. And also, as this ICJ verdict looms, just what are your thoughts, Dr. Nazreen?
Well, indeed, we have had a chat on this, and we talked about the probabilities of what the court might actually do and the functions of the court itself. Today, what the court has to do is to decide on interim measures that South Africa has asked for. The court will not make a determination on genocide. such is the nature of a matter like this. So genocide will be determined at a later point in time and deliberated by the court at a later point in time. What South Africa has asked for is interim relief. It's asked for an interdict, an injunction to stop, to cease fire, to allow for humanitarian aid, that sort of thing. The provisional measures they've asked for is what the court will look at, like the suspension of military operations, Israel's military organizations not to escalate the operations any further, to allow for access to food, for water, for sanitation, and to look at the destruction of Palestinian life in Gaza currently. What will the court actually think about these measures and what they would do is something that the court is seized with. But to look at whether genocide has been committed at this point in time is not the function of the court.
Yes, Maha, as Dr. Nazreen points out that the ICJ will not deal with the core question of whether Israel is committing genocide or not. But this is a topic, and you are a PhD candidate writing about, obviously studying Zionism, settler colonialism, genocide as well, which is basically, purely in the areas of huge interest to you. And also just looking at this core question on whether Israel is committing genocide, and the fact that the court is not dealing with this, because we know that South Africa had gone at great lengths to try and articulate their position with regard to intent to commit genocide, which featured very, very prominently in the South African presentation.
Yes, I mean, as Dr. Nazarene said, the court will not today look into whether it's a genocide or not, but moving forward, the court will be looking into that and will be looking at the merits of the case that South Africa presented. But putting things into perspective, as also was done by by South Africa and its team of lawyers in their applications, that they do put Israel's current genocidal acts and omissions in their context, in the context of Israel's colonization, of Israel's apartheid, of Israel's institutional discrimination against Palestinians, which has lasted for more than 75 years, which also, of course, includes the military occupation for 56 years now, plus. And this is very important because this is not merely a political or a moral recognition of the facts. It's the continuum that South Africa speaks about, in which these genocidal acts and omissions are taking place. The continuum in which Israel has been aiming at the elimination of the Palestinian people. The current genocidal acts may be like, it's great that the world is finally recognizing the intent to destroy and the intent to eliminate the Palestinian people in the current aggression against the Gaza Strip. But this has been part and parcel of the Zionist objective since day one, to remove the Palestinian, the Arab population from the land of Palestine in order to allow for the settler population to come and take over and dominate the land, to dominate the resources and exploit it and use it and so on. So this is not something new. It's well ingrained in the forefathers of the state of Israel, in for example Ben Gurion's statements and writings about the need to remove Arabs, about the need to remove Palestinians from the land of Palestine. And he spoke about the need to do it in when the opportunity allows, especially when war erupts. So again, this is not the first or last, but hopefully last, but it's not the first episode, let's say, of genocidal violence that we've witnessed from the Zionist and the Israeli aggression and attacks over the years. Genocide is a process, as we all recognize and as we've all seen in various instances, regrettable instances of genocide and processes of genocide around the world and against different people and nations. and they do happen. And unfortunately, in the case of Palestine and the Palestinian people, this is what's like the past 4 months. This is another phase of Israel's genocidal acts. The United Nations has already recognized the massacre of Sabra and Shatila in the refugee camps against Palestinians as an act of genocide. The UN General Assembly has recognized that. So it's important that more and more of these acts of aggression, of persecution, of killing, where the intent has been clear to destroy the population in a specific area in whole or in part, to be recognized as acts of genocide.
Yes. Dr. Nazreen, I'm sure you have studied the merits of the case and just looking at it purely from a legal perspective in terms of international law, some of the scenarios that could possibly play out when the ICJ issues its ruling.
Yes, we must be mindful of the judges themselves, and we must be mindful of our last discussion why we spoke about the ICJ judges also being political bodies and political deployments by the United Nations Security Council. We've got judges from the United States, we've got them from the likes of Russia, of France, Jamaica, Japan, Germany, Brazil, Lebanon, Morocco, we've got Somalia, Uganda, and so forth. So these judges also are appointed by their countries, and their countries, looking at the likes of the United States, Russia, France, China, we're looking at members who are the cohort of the United Nations Security Council. And these are the permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. They will have a difficult time balancing the political interests that go right back to their country as the ones who hold the coffers to the functioning of the UN, and also looking at what the law actually says. But again, we are bound, judges are bound by a very, very prominent principle. They must act without fear, favor, and prejudice. So looking at the law specifically, it would be wholly remiss of the court not to look at the provisional measures South Africa has sought, to at least say there should be a ceasefire, to at least say there should be humanitarian relief, open the gates, allow for this relief to enter. On the other hand, the court might very well say, well, we're not going to allow any provisional measures. We're not going to look at South Africa's submissions in the light South Africa presented them. We reject them on the basis that Israel did ask for a bit more time. There's a notion in law that's called the exhaustion of remedy, and this has prominence. So prior to seeking an injunction, before we go to court to say that there should be an entity granted against Israel, all measures should have been exhausted. Now, this is a strict interpretation of the law. But when one looks at the liberal, the contextual interpretation, it would be wholly remiss of the court not to see what has been happening for decades already. This is now common knowledge, it's commonplace. And in law, we call that judicial notice, where a tree is a tree, and we recognize a tree is a tree. Nobody needs to prove it. So when this has been happening to the people of Gaza, in Palestine, for the court to ignore that, the moral legal obligation would be totally removed from it. These are two scenarios that play themselves out in terms of what the court might do today.
Yes, Dr. Nazreen, and also Maha, we're going to go for a quick break. We've got to pay a few bills. We'll put both of you on hold and we'll be back in a minute or two.
Rejuvenating media day by day. This is Salam Media.
Discover the Africa of your dreams and surround yourself with her spectacular beauty. Relax beneath her serene sunsets and explore wildlife at its natural best. It's where the pride of Africa comes together. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve. Get to know the Big Five or cruise on an elephant safari game drive. Interact with lion and tiger cubs and enjoy world-class halal cuisine while we pamper you during your 5-star stay. Indulge in the true African experience. For reservations, call now on 042 203 1400 or visit kwantu.co.za. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve, the place of gathering.
Sponsor an orphan, and you'll help support a vulnerable child to have the education they've always dreamed of, so they can build a brighter future. You'll be feeding a hungry stomach and a hungry mind with knowledge that will last them a lifetime. That's the power of an education. Sponsor an orphan now with Islamic Relief.
Shimmer, sparkle, captivate. Nothing less than a masterpiece. Droplets of gold inspires precious design. Platinum bursts with intricate freshness, and every pure diamond becomes more than just a girl's best friend. Voda Gold Gem Jewelers, where timeless dreams become a reality. Come to us. We tailor-make designer gold, platinum, and diamond jewelry. Trade in or remodel your old gold. Clad yourself with classy name-branded watches. We offer insurance valuation and free zakat calculation. Visit us at 534 Ridge Road, Overport, or call 031 208 9142. Voda Gold Gem Jewelers, manufacturers of fine gold and diamond jewelry.
Our brothers and sisters in Palestine are enduring unimaginable hardships. Ashraful Aid teams are on the ground, delivering crucial aid to those in need. But we can't do it alone. Palestine is suffering and they need your help. Your support can make a world of difference. Visit www.ashrafulaid.org today and donate to bring hope, relief, and healing to those who are in need.
Rejuvenating media day by day. This is Salam Media.
With all eyes on The Hague this afternoon in the Netherlands at 2 p.m. South African time, we continue with our broadcast this morning right here on Salam Media, doing a pre-analysis of the ICJ interim ruling against the state of Israel. My two guests this morning, international human rights lawyer, Dr. Advocate Nazreen Shaik-Peremanov, and also PhD candidate Zionism and settler colonialism and genocide, Maha Abdallah, with us. Now, there are many likely scenarios that are playing out or that are likely to play out, and these are questions that are being raised. We've covered the issues surrounding genocide, whether the ICJ will deal or whether it will not deal with the core question of whether Israel is committing genocide. The other scenarios could be, could the court throw out the case? What emergency measures that South Africa has requested, will they be granted in full? Will they be granted in part? What happens if the ICJ orders no provisional measures? Could this ruling make any difference for what is playing out in Gaza as we speak right now? All of this we're unpacking ahead of the ICJ ruling this afternoon. Maha Abdallah, just to continue with you, and also just following up from what Dr. Nazreen was talking about, the ICJ. Now, we know that it is a highly political body, apart from just being a legal body. And as we speak right now, we find that, this is becoming like a sports event where people are actually betting as to which judge will support whom, who are going to be the adopting positions that will go against Israel and the ruling against Israel, who will support Israel throughout the swing votes, all of this, and just your thoughts on this whole question surrounding an organ like the ICJ being a political body and not looking at the hard legal issues that South Africa had produced. Maha, can you hear me?
Yes. Could you please repeat that? Sorry.
I said, just your thoughts on the fact that the ICJ is such a highly political body, and again, political affiliations, political biases, all of those could actually have a play in the outcome.
Yes, I mean with the ICJ, one would hope, given that it's it assumes the highest judicial organ of the United Nations, one would assume, and the principal judicial organ in this framework, uh, one would assume that it will tackle the matter purely legally and without political bias, without interference of any sort from any state or otherwise. This is what the International Court of Justice should be representing, and how it should be carrying out its work and proceedings. But unfortunately, there's a lot of cynicism and skepticism among Palestinians and among those who work for Palestinian rights, because the international system has never really afforded Palestinians justice, has never afforded or granted or allowed for perpetrators of Palestinian rights and freedoms and violations against them any sort of accountability. And this has been the case for decades and decades and decades. So the sheer impunity, the open impunity and unconditional impunity, and the way in which states and the international community, not all of it, but the western part of the international community, has worked for decades to shield Israel, to shield perpetrators of grave breaches of international law, of international crimes, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, and now the crime of genocide, to shield them from any form of accountability, has already spoken a lot. But once again, there's still some glimmers of hope. South Africa managed to restore a bit of that hope in the international system. So there's still hope that the court today would rule and would deliver the provisional measures that South Africa has requested in its application and in its hearing 2 weeks ago. And the fact that the court is delivering the decision, let's say today, 2 weeks from or since the public hearings took place, it means that the court is taking the urgency of South Africa's request seriously, and the urgency which is premised on the urgent and dire and catastrophic humanitarian and human situation on the ground in the Gaza Strip as a result of Israel's continued genocidal aggression.
Dr. Nazreen, worst case scenario for South Africa or best case scenario for Israel, should the court decide to throw out this case? And we know during the submission by Israel, they went at great lengths talking about jurisdiction, and the global court does not have jurisdiction over the case, and the whole question surrounding South Africa, whether they had communicated, whether they had not communicated with Israel adequately. Is that a factor?
Indeed, it is a massive factor. It is one of the most enormous facts the court would take into account. The court would say, ordinarily speaking, when you come to us, then you should be able to show that this matter is ripe for hearing. It should not be a matter that is premature. And in that instance, the court will have due regard and would give due weight to the fact that Israel is saying, literally speaking, and from a purely a contextual point of interpretation in law, that you did not give us enough time. And in that instance, the court will say, well, go back and deal with this. But it doesn't mean the court is relieved of the fact that it's seized with the question of genocide. It just means that right now, interim measures, we would say nothing about it. Urgent relief, we would say nothing about it at this point in time. So that is the absolute worst case scenario. However, I must say this. I would like to believe that morally and legally, because I mean the law is informed by moral values in any event, it will be wholly, grossly negligent of the court in terms of international law, humanitarian law, and human rights law, especially in light of the ICC, especially in light of the jurisprudence of the International Criminal Court and the ICTY, which was the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, and so forth. The United Nations has displayed its arms previously. It displayed how it wrestles, and it displayed that it does have some measure of force by bringing to account grave breaches of international law, grave breaches of the Geneva Convention. So in that instance, for the court not to say anything, mindful of the international jurisprudence, in 2000, the United Nations took a resolution, and the ICTY, at that point in time, I was still with them. We actually went with the team to Tokyo, and the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal was established against Emperor Hirohito for sexual slavery carried out during the World War. I was part of the prosecutorial team. The United Nations has this immense jurisprudence, and for the ICJ not to look at this, I would wish to think that they would not ignore this. So something should happen. Something should happen. If the case is totally dismissed on the grounds of relief, it still means that the case of genocide is something that South Africa wishes for the court to make a determination on. In that instance, South Africa may refile. It may re-petition the court to say, look at this matter. There are also political measures that can be looked at and so forth, but that is something that's separate, sort of like how we had sanctions in South Africa during apartheid. So measures are actually there in place, and those options are most certainly there.
Yes, and also Maha, just looking at it from a South African perspective, and I just like your thoughts on South Africa and the seriousness with which South Africa is actually treating this case at the ICJ. We knew when we've chosen one of the best legal teams, and I don't think we could have chosen any better. We've seen South Africa being applauded for this from right across the entire world, and also looking at the personal interest that the South African government has taken in the case. At that point in time, they were accompanied by the Minister of Justice himself. And looking at the ruling today, we've got our very own Minister of International Relations who is going to present herself at The Hague today. So, just your thoughts on South Africa and how serious South Africa is about this case and this action that they brought against the state of Israel.
There's no doubt about South Africa's seriousness when it comes to Palestinian liberation, justice for the Palestinian people. And this is not new. And South Africa, both represented in its people and its leaders, has long been at the forefront in supporting the Palestinian struggle for liberation, for justice, dignity, and life. Again, this is not new, and this is, part of the relationship between the two people. So it wasn't surprising, let's say, that South Africa would bring this case before the International Court of Justice as a way to try and deliver a ceasefire when the United Nations Security Council, when the powerful states of the international community have deliberately and repeatedly failed to call for a ceasefire amidst the ongoing genocidal aggression that is taking place against Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. And of course, there is no doubt that South Africa's own struggle for liberation, its own resistance to colonization, to apartheid, to slavery, and to various forms of oppression and persecution throughout different parts or intervals of history have inspired, shaped, and defined South Africa's role and responsibility towards human rights, towards freedoms and justice, not only at home, but for the global community, and including for the Palestinian people. And for that, of course, this is a role model that other states should follow. It has, as in this application and in this triggering or invoking the Genocide Convention, South Africa is living up to its duties, to its obligations, including its duty to prevent and to put an end to genocide.
Yes, Dr. Nazreen, I just want to move on and looking at the emergency measures that South Africa has requested. And this is going to be quite interesting because some commentators believe that the court may fall short of ordering a full ceasefire. Possibly they may order emergency measures in part, perhaps not in full. Now, all of this at this point in time, we know is unclear in terms of what interim measures that the court might order, but there are experts, some under international law, and you can clarify this issue with me, that are saying that the court needs to order a ceasefire because if you look at what is happening on the ground in the Gaza Strip, there is no choice but to order an immediate ceasefire.
Yes, well, if there is an immediate ceasefire occurring and if the court has to order that, then the court will also have to look at the role of Hamas. And the court is not seized with that power. The court does not have the power to look at parties other than states themselves. State parties are actually the signatories to the ICJ statute. And that means only state parties can be considered, may be heard, and may be represented and so forth. So if the court says that Israel must stop its ceasefire, must cease with ceasefire, and they must actually now, all military operations must be suspended, and there shouldn't be an escalation of the military operations in Gaza and in the Palestinian life, then what Israel is going to say in response is this: we have a right to self-defense. Pretty much what happened in Latin America with the Peruvian region and the Zapatista movement. That you have a liberation organization that is standing up and saying that the international community has said nothing about this. Well, they've said a bit of volume on a scale from 1 to 10, they've spoken at 0.5 or at 0.4. So a liberation organization now emerged. Now, what do you do in that instance? So if the ICJ says there should be a ceasefire, they would balance what the response might be with regards to Israel, as they put forward in any event. In their case, in their submissions, they submitted to the ICJ that the life of Hamas is almost interdependent and interlinked with the Palestinian people. So how do you separate one from the other? Be that as it may, though, the court should actually say, given the large and the mammoth scale of destruction, the untold suffering of the Palestinian people, the ceasefire should be in operation.
Yes, and Maha, just looking at yourself now, you mentioned to me before we came live that you are in Brussels and you are going to make your way to The Hague. Hopefully, you will be making it in time. Just looking at what are you expecting? What are some of your expectations in terms of the outcome?
My expectations are like many other people's expectations, that the court will take all of the provisional measures that South Africa requested and order those. First and foremost, the suspension of the military operations, the lifting of the siege and the closure, so unimpeded humanitarian aid and assistance would enter the Gaza Strip, and that Israel stops its genocidal acts and incitement to genocide, and to fight, to instruct or order international bodies and fact-finding missions and so on to be able to enter the Gaza Strip and the entirety of the occupied Palestine in order to carry out investigations so perpetrators are held to account for their atrocities committed against Palestinians. And I would like to also remind that today is also we will also be looking at the United States, where there will be the live hearing for a federal lawsuit that's been brought by Palestinians in the US against Biden, against the US government for their complicity in genocide and Israel's genocidal acts, and for their direct involvement and contribution to this genocide. So today, the World Court will deliver its provisional measures in a case brought by South Africa against Israel, triggering the Genocide Convention. There will also be a court hearing in the United States against the Biden administration and government, also on genocide. So it seems to me that the people have already made their word and have already decided that this is a genocide and that it must stop. It must be brought to an end. And I would also hope that the court today, the ICJ, would also order and instruct third states and states of the international community to stop their complicity, to stop the transfer of arms and weapons to Israel because of its genocidal acts, or because of the risks of genocide that it incurs as well.
Yes, and also, Dr. Nazreen, just looking at the decision that will be made by the court, and will this be an entanglement between a legal argument and a political argument? And this is important, and I think you touched on it briefly when we spoke about the judges, the fact that they come from different countries. It is unclear as to the interest of their countries. Would they put the interest of their countries ahead of legal judgments? And this again raises a question in terms of how politicized this decision is going to be. And also, another scenario: what happens if the ICJ orders no provisional measures?
It's the reality of what we actually experience at law school. One of the most famous phrases is, see what the judge slept last night before you actually approach him or her for a decision, because the comfort of sleep would then depend. What happened at home last night would very much inform what the judge decides. So back home in the US, back home in China, back home in Russia, back home in India and in Brazil, we have 4 judges from the BRICS nations. And these 4 judges from the BRICS nations would invariably be informed by what it is that suits the BRICS nations and what it is that actually would justify politically what they would say. But we must keep in mind that, by the very same token, the president of the ICJ, the judge president, is from the US. But of course, the vice president is from Russia as well. So that political balancing is most certainly there. We look at the judges from Morocco, we have Slovakia. So, of course, they would align themselves with the jurisprudence of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, understanding what happened in the Serbian-Bosnia-Herzegovina conflict. They would then be informed by that jurisprudence. So one has to be mindful of the context, and the context most definitely informs how it is that we would proceed. Now, on your second question, if the ICJ does absolutely nothing about this, then South Africa, if the ICJ says, well, we do not have jurisdiction, please go back and talk to each other about this, which is what most courts do. So if we bring it down to a very basic level, if we look at domestic courts, national courts, when they say this matter is not urgent, and this is what South Africa said. South Africa said this matter is urgent. It is dismally urgent, and therefore highly urgent. You must make the following rulings. These are our askings. Now, if the court says that this is not so urgent, means that you can't really ask for an interdict. You can't ask for these provisional measures. Now, if the court chooses to go in that direction, it is saying that we are mindful of what Israel's submissions were. We are mindful of the fact that Israel said it was untimely, it was premature. We should have had more time to discuss with South Africa. The likes of the Department of International Affairs in South Africa should have given more time to Israel, and we should have had some sort of discussion. But I am very, very hopeful that the court would not go in that direction, because Professor John Dugard made a most compelling argument on jurisdiction. And that too went back to context to say, look, this is not happening in isolation. The world knows about this. It is out there. The United Nations has been seized with this for a number of years. So please, you would have to do something about this. Now, if the court decides that it is not going to make any ruling in terms of the emergency measures that South Africa has sought, then South Africa, it doesn't mean that this is the end of the matter. It doesn't mean that the matter comes to a complete close and that South Africa is left in the lurch and the people of Palestine, the people of Gaza, are left without any relief whatsoever. The overall case, the case of genocide, is something the court is still seized with. And the court must decide on the evidence produced, placed before it. What the evidentiary value is, how cogent is the evidence, and is there indeed a case for genocide? Have the elements actually been met? They have to make a determination. And then South Africa will still have a second opportunity to say, well, we're going to bring the matter back to the ICJ. It doesn't end everything right there and then. So we're looking at the highest court in the world, judicially speaking, in terms of ranking. And yet there is no appeal authority. It does not mean the court can't be repetitioned. And of course, we have had a number of states, number of other countries speaking out after South Africa's petition to the ICJ. And these states can come together most certainly. And they can have a discussion and say, we're going to bring what we call in law basically a class action. We will stand together as state parties because we are party to the Genocide Convention, firstly. Secondly, we are party to the ICJ statute, so we do have a right to stand before the court.
Maha, just finally, your thoughts on Israel. Now, we've seen defiance, we've seen the arrogance on the part of the Zionist state of Israel, their response to the ICJ, and we've seen it throughout the hearings, and also in terms of the final ruling, irrespective of the outcome and which way the ICJ rules. We're still going to see that defiance, we're still going to see this arrogance, and we know that, it's going to be a ruling. They will not be able to appeal. But again, there is a lack of enforcement on the part of the ICJ. Again, going back to the UN Security Council, the US again, the veto, all of that will come into play. And I just needed your thoughts, on the defiance and what this actually means, for I would say for global, for the rule of law globally.
Absolutely. I mean, Israel acts with complete, as I mentioned earlier, with complete impunity, with total disregard to international law, to international instruments, to any decisions or resolutions by the United Nations or courts or otherwise. And again, this is not new. This is how it has been, and this arrogance that you speak about has been very much saturated and emboldened by the international community and the continuous shielding and unconditional support and so on. And as we've seen, even in the public hearing, when Israel, the team of lawyers representing Israel, at one point it seemed that they were even taking the court so lightly, like by losing papers and so on. This is ridiculous in the way that they undermine such a court and its weight and so on. But at the same time, the question before the court and the court's decision today is not only something that Palestinians are waiting for, but a lot of people and nations around the world, especially those who have been oppressed and colonized and persecuted, they're also looking at the court, and they're also looking at whether the international justice mechanism will deliver some sort of justice in this case. And in the response of the global South, especially to the case and to the reactions of Western states to this particular case, it felt that Palestine represents a global event for decades of imposed injustices and dehumanizing injustices for the millions of people who have been oppressed. And Namibia's reaction may be one of those that come to mind. So Palestine is also exposing the double standards and the selectivity of international law and of the international justice mechanisms, unfortunately. But this is important, and today could be the tipping point as well, not only for Palestine, but for the global south in its entirety, and for all those who have been subject to colonization, regardless of where they are, and to elimination processes and other crimes and violations against them. So will there be a new era for international law, for international justice, or will we continue to see much of the same and work with tools and avenues that do not really serve the interest of justice for the people around the world?
Well, I think what you're saying is extremely important, Maha, in terms of the tipping point, and this is exactly throughout this attack and this war on Gaza. We've heard it over and over again. Many commentators expressing that Gaza could be the tipping point in terms of the international order at this point in time, and possibly will determine what a future world would actually look like as well. Dr. Nazreen, just final thoughts before we end off the broadcast this morning from yourself. I think we have lost. Is Dr. Nazreen around? Dr. Nazreen? Yes, I think for some reason or the other, we have lost Dr. Nazreen. We can't hear her, but I think we've obviously covered, given a lot of comprehensive coverage ahead of this the ICJ ruling today, and we thank both our guests this morning. Maha Abdallah, we thank you. All the best to you as well, and also your travels. Please travel safely as you make your way to The Hague this afternoon. And as we mentioned, all eyes will be on The Hague this afternoon at 2 p.m. South African time. And we thank you. We do appreciate you taking time out talking to us right here on Salam Media.
Thank you very much.
Maha Abdallah with us, and Dr. Nazreen Sheikh with us also this morning. Dr. Nazreen Shaik-Peremanov, international human rights lawyer, and Maha Abdallah, PhD candidate, Zionism, settler colonialism, and genocide. With that, we're going to go for a break. We've got one final bit of broadcast to do this morning, which is going to be a Nikah announcement, and we will then head towards closure this morning right here on News and Views.